I loathe the current state of my existence. My wife embodies traits of a shrew, and unfortunately, my daughter seems to have inherited them. Disappointed by my refusal to confront this reality, my son departed as soon as he reached adulthood, unwilling to be a part of our dysfunctional dynamic. My daughter, influenced by her mother's behavior, willingly embraced similar patterns, leaving me feeling sorry for her unsuspecting husband. Regrets about my marriage surfaced early, likely before our first anniversary. Wendy possessed an overinflated sense of attractiveness, perpetually engaging in flirtations to uphold her self-perception. However, her actions extended beyond mere flirtation, as she saw no issue in engaging in extramarital affairs, so long as I remained oblivious. Yet, I was always aware. For 26 years, I endured this knowledge in silence, explaining perhaps why my son felt compelled to escape. The pressing question remains, why did I stay? I wish I could provide a compelling answer. Disapproving of my wife's actions, I lacked the drive or courage to confront her. She provided the basics: cooked meals, clean laundry, and a tidy home. Despite her nagging and unpleasant demeanor, I learned to tune it out, believing I had no other options. Sadly, I epitomized mediocrity: a receding hairline, bifocals, and 20 pounds overweight, primarily consisting of belly fat. Stuck in the same dead-end job for 26 years, my career prospects dwindled as younger, more ambitious individuals surpassed me. My work merely sustained our basic needs, with no savings, retirement plan, or property ownership to speak of. Our future appeared as bleak as our past, a relentless cycle of disappointment and stagnation. Truly, life feels utterly dismal. Wendy managed to maintain herself better than I did. She diligently exercised and washed her weight, seemingly for the purpose of attracting other men. To be fair, Wendy wasn't brazenly pursuing multiple men for casual encounters. Her affairs were discreet, typically involving only one man at a time, and perhaps only one or two different individuals each year. Whether the relationships fizzled out or she ended them, I remained indifferent. At least she had the decency not to bring them home. I, on the other hand, never entertained the idea of straying. Despite occasional advances from other women, I dismissed them with a chuckle, convinced they would be disappointed if I reciprocated. It all seemed like too much hassle. My daughter Jane settled for a meek husband, much like myself. Perhaps she saw in him a reflection of her own father. Shortly after their wedding, they welcomed twin daughters, adorable but bearing the weight of familial patterns that seemed destined to repeat. It was a regrettable prospect. The brightest aspect of my life was my rapport with my secretary, Alice, and our company's male clerk, George. Although Alice officially managed 6 representatives, I felt she gave me preferential treatment. George, with his sunny disposition, was a beacon of positivity in my day-to-day. He never grumbled and always wore a smile. While I couldn't discern his career aspirations, he appeared content with his work. Alice and George shared a camaraderie in the office, exchanging gossip and jokes. I found solace in their company, as much as I sought refuge from my wife. Despite working alongside Alice for 13 years, I remained oblivious to much about her personal life. The two critical facts I gleaned were her single status and her disdain for my wife. I never delved too deeply into the reasons behind either. One day, my daughter Jane burst into my office, brimming with urgency to share some news. She excitedly announced that she had enrolled her twins in a scoliosis research study. It turned out both girls had slight spinal curvatures, prompting Jane's deep concern. Given the hereditary nature of genetic scoliosis, numerous organizations had secured substantial governing grants to investigate its transmission across generations. Jane meticulously outlined the potential ramifications, including its impact on the heart and other potentially life-threatening medical issues. As part of the study, researchers were analyzing the genetic backgrounds of the families involved. Jane proudly handed me a small padded envelope containing a plastic bottle and detailed instructions. It was a departure from my expectation of cheek swabs. Instead, I was to provide a saliva sample by spitting into the bottle and sealing it. The envelope was prepaid and pre-addressed, requiring nothing more than following the provided instructions. Grateful for my cooperation, Jane left with a smile, leaving me to contemplate the significance of our participation in this crucial research endeavor. Alice breezed into my office with a fresh cup of coffee, using the pretext to pry into my affairs. "What did the spawn of the devil want?" she quipped. "She's enrolled the kids in some scoliosis study and needs my DNA," I replied, defending Wendy despite Alice's evident disdain. "I thought you did those DNA tests 4 or 5 years ago," Alice recalled. "I did, but they're unaware. I just wanted to ensure the kids were mine before updating my will," I explained, noticing Alice's enjoyment in ridiculing Wendy whenever she got the chance. "I can understand why that would be a concern," Alice remarked with a grin. "Well, don't keep me in suspense. Are you the father or not? Jane and Oscar are both my children. What more can I say?" I responded. "With luck like that, you should play the lottery," Alice joked. "There's nothing wrong with Oscar. He was just fed up with the whole situation and pissed that his dad didn't make it right," I interjected, urging Alice to tone down her insults toward Wendy. "Sorry, boss. I just can't help myself. Are you going to pee in the bottle?" Alice teased. "It's spit, Alice. They want me to spit in the bottle," I corrected her, just as George walked in with the day's mail and memos. Alice's eyes lit up. "George, baby, you're just in time. Martin needs you to spit in this bottle for him." I sensed George's surprise mirrored my own at Alice's unexpected suggestion. Suddenly, participating in the study seemed more intriguing. Handing George the vial, Alice and I observed as he carefully contributed his DNA. "The label says Martin Davis," George remarked. "I don't mind helping out as long as you two keep me out of trouble." "No worries, George. Martin and I have got your back," Alice assured him, dropping the vial into the envelope and sealing it. "I'll make sure this gets in the mail today, boss," she declared, departing with a beaming smile. George looked slightly bewildered. "You know she's sweet on you, Mr. Davis," George remarked. "What?" "You know she's sweet on you, Mr. Davis," George repeated. I was taken aback by George's observation. Alice often spoke highly of me, and I'd caught her stealing glances when I wasn't looking. She'd even mentioned a few times that she wished I wasn't married. I had always considered Alice and me as friends, never contemplating a different kind of relationship. George's words flattered me, and I found myself smiling at the thought. Perhaps Alice would indeed be a better companion than Wendy. It dawned on me that I needed to pay closer attention to the dynamics unfolding around me. "Thanks for the help, George. See you later this afternoon," I said with newfound awareness. For the following weeks, life proceeded as usual, albeit with a newfound attentiveness towards Alice prompted by George's words. It struck me as peculiar that my secretary held me in higher regard than my wife ever did. For the first time in my marriage, the idea of divorce crept into my mind. My usual complacency towards my marital situation began to wane as I found solace in Alice's kindness. On Friday afternoons, I often made a habit of leaving work a bit early, a routine I had adopted years ago without facing any objections. Arriving home, I settled into my favorite armchair, only to overhear a heated argument between my wife and daughter emanating from the kitchen. They were unaware of my presence, allowing me to eavesdrop on their conversation. "No, Jane, I have no clue who it could be. I was certain it was your father," Wendy's voice rang out. "My father? Damn it, Mom, this isn't my father," Jane retorted, her frustration palpable. I surmised she had received the DNA results she was holding. "I don't know who my father is, and to make matters worse, my own mother has no idea either." Their conversation was interspersed with mumbling and confusion as they spoke over each other, but I managed to grasp some of the dialogue. "They can't even put a name to this DNA sample. It's not in any database whatsoever. If you can't help me, who the hell can?" Jane's assertive tone, as she confronted her mother, brought a smirk to my face. Payback indeed. Though I wished I could catch every word, I had to settle for just a fragment of their conversation. For the next few minutes, their voices faded into indistinct murmurs. The last snippet I caught was about another test scheduled for Tuesday morning, followed by the sound of the door slamming shut as Jane stormed out. Sooner or later, I knew I'd have to disclose the truth, but for now, I relished in the moment. It was undoubtedly the most thrilling part of my week. I anticipated Alice's excitement when I recounted the events on Monday. The only downside was having to wait until then to share the news. After dinner, Wendy announced her plan to visit a friend dealing with personal issues, giving me the perfect excuse to pay a visit to Alice. "Martin, what the hell are you doing here? You should have phoned first. I look like crap," Alice exclaimed upon seeing me. "Sorry, I couldn't resist. I thought you might want to hear how your little trick with the DNA sample panned out," I replied. Despite her casual appearance in sweatpants and a pullover shirt, Alice looked surprisingly attractive without makeup. It dawned on me that I had never truly noticed her beauty before, despite seeing her every day at work. "Want coffee or a beer?" Alice offered. "I'll take a beer, but if I have more than 3, I won't be able to drive home," I replied. "No problem. I'll make sure there are at least 4 in the fridge, maybe 6, Alice said with a suggestive tone. 6 beers, and I'll be out like a light," I joked. "Don't worry. I've got a big bed," Alice teased, sending a clear signal. "Dan." Alice was making advances, but that wasn't why I came over. I just wanted to share the situation between my wife and daughter. Yet it seemed Alice had other ideas, even if I was drunk. I'm not much of a drinker, so I usually can't handle much. We started by discussing the DNA trick and chuckled over the results. But as the night wore on, our conversation meandered in various directions. After 3 hours and more beer than I could handle, I was feeling pretty buzzed. Alice convinced me it wasn't safe to drive home. Eventually, we found ourselves in bed together. That night, I experienced my first blowjob in 8 years, and I was more than happy to reciprocate. We made love twice more before morning. When I returned home, Wendy was still in bed. I kicked off my shoes and collapsed on the sofa. The next thing I knew, my wife was shaking me awake. "What are you doing down here? Go up, take a shower, and if you're still hungover, use the bed. If you're going to go out drinking, at least learn how to do it properly," Wendy scolded me. Wendy couldn't fathom that I had spent the night with another woman. Instead, she assumed I had gone out drinking and stumbled home drunk. I found the whole situation uproarious. I knew I would be repeating the experience more often from then on. Since it was Saturday, there were chores to be done. Lawn mowing, car washing. I spent the entire day working and felt invigorated. It was as if a whole new world had opened up to me. I realized I no longer needed to resign myself to a life of humiliation and nagging. Imagining life without Wendy was effortless, while picturing a future with Alice came naturally. I resolved that the next time I saw her, I'd limit myself to no more than 2 beers. As much as I wished the weekend would continue indefinitely, Monday eventually arrived. Alice greeted me with a radiant smile, looking better than ever. We agreed to maintain a composed demeanor around the rest of the staff. Our efforts seemed successful until George walked in. With his uncanny intuition, he sensed a shift between me and Alice immediately. He didn't say a word but grinned broadly at us. We returned the smile, confirming his suspicions. It seemed to brighten his day. No one else in the office seemed to have a clue. After deciphering the conversation between Wendy and Jane, I anticipated something significant happening on Tuesday morning. So I asked Alice to have George spit into one of the small cups from the drinking fountain. Carefully, I stashed the unappealing cup in the top left drawer of my desk, fashioning a makeshift funnel by pinching its sides. At around 10 o'clock, Wendy arrived unexpectedly, or so she thought. Alice courteously ushered her into my office, leaving the door ajar. "Martin, there was an issue with the DNA sample you provided Jane 2 weeks ago. She needs another one. I brought a bottle with me. Would you mind? Wendy inquired. Of course not. What happened with the last one? It didn't seem that complicated, I responded. I'm not entirely sure, but somehow the sample got contaminated and was unusable. It'll just take a moment, Wendy explained as she handed me the bottle, waiting for me to provide a new sample. Just then, Alice popped her head in. Wendy, if you have your parking ticket, I can validate it for you. As Wendy fumbled through her purse, passing the ticket to Alice, I swiftly filled the bottle from the cup, avoiding any eye contact. With Wendy's attention momentarily diverted, I smoothly screwed the lid onto the bottle and handed it back to her. I had to admit, it looked as though I had indeed provided a fresh sample. Here you go, Alice said, handing Wendy the validated ticket before returning to her desk. Wendy smiled as she accepted the bottle, dropping it into the envelope. The inside of my desk drawer was a mess, but neither Alice nor I seemed to mind. We spent the rest of the afternoon giggling like school children. Alice didn't complain as she cleaned up the mess in my desk drawer. Over the next few weeks, Alice and I met up several times, but we never spent the night together. Meanwhile, Wendy began to suspect that I was becoming a regular at the local bars, spending all my spare time there. I saw no reason to dissuade her from that notion. Sometimes when I was with Alice, we simply talked or watched a movie without engaging in intimacy, but when we did, it was always enjoyable. I made sure to have at least 2 beers before returning home to Wendy. One Wednesday morning, my son-in-law, Carl Taylor, showed up at my office. Martin, I need your help. I'm at my wit's end. Jane and your wife have turned our home into a battleground, he confessed anxiously. Whoa, hold on a second. Carl, what's going on? What kind of battle are we talking about here? I inquired, quietly turning on the intercom so Alice could listen in. Carl seemed jittery, clearly uncomfortable bringing up the subject with me. We had never really had a heart-to-heart conversation before, and he always seemed a bit reserved. I didn't want to discourage him, so I encouraged him to elaborate. They'd been arguing nonstop about the DNA tests Jane needs for the scoliosis study. Thank goodness I'm at work most of the day, he explained. Can you give me more details? I asked, keeping my voice calm as I glanced at the intercom, knowing Alice was listening in. I'm not certain, but it seems that neither of the DNA samples you provided match with Jane's or the twins. This has deeply upset Jane. She always believed you were her biological father, and now she's uncertain. If this is a sensitive topic for you, Mr. Davis, just let me know, and I'll stop. I assumed you were aware of some of this, Carl explained hesitantly. Don't worry about it, Carl. I'm interested in understanding what's going on. I hate to admit it, but I've had some suspicions myself over the years, I responded, fabricating a lie to ease his discomfort. Jane pressured Wendy to get DNA samples from 3 other men, but none of those samples matched up either. Naturally, Jane was furious. She accused her mother of promiscuity, suggesting she'd slept with so many men she couldn't remember their names. Wendy was in tears the other day. Carl continued. That sounds pretty rough, Carl. Do you happen to know who these 3 men are? I asked. Sure. Carl retrieved a piece of paper from his folder and handed it to me. Glancing at it briefly, I recognized 2 of the names. The worst part, Mr. Davis, is that Jane never asked me to provide a sample for the tests. From their conversations, I gathered it involved spitting in a bottle. But I never did that. I saw some papers indicating my DNA and stating I'm the twins' father, but I never gave a sample. Something doesn't add up, Carl concluded. I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony of the situation. Here I was attempting to deceive them about being Jane's father, while Jane was concealing the fact that Carl wasn't the father of the twins. My daughter's deceitfulness rivaled her mother's. I felt sorry for Carl, but in a way, he was in the same predicament as I was. Carl, are you happy in your marriage to my daughter? I asked. Honestly, sir, no. I think I've made a huge mistake, but I don't know what to do about it, Carl admitted. Look at me, Carl. I made the same mistake 26 years ago and did nothing about it. Do you want to end up like me? I pressed. Carl remained silent, knowing the answer but reluctant to vocalize it for fear of hurting my feelings. What is it you need from me, Carl? I inquired. I suppose nothing. I just needed someone to talk to. You always seemed like a sensible man. If you have any ideas, please let me know, Carl replied. I pondered for a moment, then leaned over my desk, locking eyes with my son-in-law. Run, Carl, run. I couldn't discern whether he felt relieved or crushed. Nevertheless, he stood, smiled, and shook my hand. It was apparent I wouldn't be seeing Carl Taylor for a while. I wished him luck. Martin Davis, you're the biggest hypocrite in the world. How can you give advice like that to your son-in-law when you won't follow it yourself? Alice's voice dripped with reproach. You're right. You're absolutely right. I admitted. I wish I had someone like me to talk to. I conceded, feeling a pang of guilt. Talk to me. I'll offer you the same advice you gave to Carl. I've observed you for the past 13 years, and I've never understood why you allowed yourself to be treated poorly by that woman. If there was ever a good time for you to take action, it's now. Martin Davis, you have 1 week to make a decision, or I'm out of here, Alice declared sternly. It was the first time she'd ever slammed my office door, and it left me with the distinct impression that she meant business. Felix Robinson and James Allen were 2 friends of the family, although now I realize they were closer to my wife than to me. Those were the names on the list Carl had given me. As for Dirk Martinez, I had no clue who he was. By the time Alice had cooled off and returned to the office with a fresh cup of coffee, the tension had eased. She didn't apologize for her outburst, but at least she wasn't haranguing me anymore. I didn't need 2 women doing that. All right, Martin, who are these guys on the list your son-in-law gave you? Alice inquired. I slid the piece of paper across the desk to her. 2 of them are old family friends, and the 3rd guy, I have no idea. What do you want to do about it? She pressed. Would it upset you if I said I didn't want to do anything? I responded. Yes, it would. I don't expect you to seek vengeance or anything, but I do expect you to get off your backside and take action. After 13 years, I finally got you to notice me, and I don't intend to regress. If you don't come up with something, I will, Alice declared firmly. Dinner that night was tense. It was clear that Wendy was bothered by something, but she didn't share it. We stumbled through the meal with minimal conversation, which was actually an improvement from our usual exchanges. Surprisingly, she had no snide remarks when I excused myself to head down to the bar. This time, I actually went and ended up getting thoroughly drunk. The next morning at work seemed normal until George walked in. He dropped the mail on Alice's desk and then handed me a brochure. The expression on my face must have prompted an explanation. I gave one to Alice too. Since you both enjoy traveling, I thought you might be interested in this, he said, wearing his usual grin as he exited my office. As I glanced at the pamphlet, a smile crept onto my face. It advertised a 4-week tractor-trailer driver's course that leads to a commercial driver's license. Alice walked in, stifling a chuckle, holding the same course information. Where does George come up with this stuff? I asked. That's not fair, Martin. I don't think it's nonsense. In fact, I find it intriguing, Alice countered. You must be joking. I can't picture either of us doing this, let alone both of us, I replied incredulously. But I can, and I think I'd look pretty good in jeans, she retorted. You do, but what does that have to do with anything? I questioned. Well, I can't exactly wear a skirt while driving a big rig, she quipped with a grin. The conversation with Alice stretched on for nearly an hour until she eventually persuaded me. We both took the afternoon off, and within 2 hours, we were signed up for the Lehigh Institute Driver's School. With plenty of accumulated vacation time and sick leave, we could complete the course and still retain our jobs if it didn't pan out. That evening at home was anything but pleasant. Carl had left Jane for reasons unknown, and while I felt a sense of pride in the boy, Wendy seemed to hold me responsible for his departure. I neither confirmed nor denied her suspicions, simply excusing myself and heading to the local bar. Eventually, I found myself at Alice's place, returning home only to find Wendy already in bed. Work kept us occupied over the next few days. Alice had to bring a temporary worker up to speed to cover her absence, while I had to rearrange my workload to ensure everything was covered in my absence. Alice even arranged for me to meet with a divorce lawyer, physically accompanying me to the appointment. I didn't disclose the grounds for divorce, but the lawyer did ask for the names of the men Carl had mentioned. I informed Wendy that I would be working remotely for the next few weeks, to which she seemed indifferent. Living close to the school made our daily commute easy. One stormy night, Alice and I found ourselves sharing our first motel room, rather than braving the drive home. The 4 weeks of training flew by. While I excelled in driving skills, Alice surpassed me in backing up and parking maneuvers. Nonetheless, we both earned our commercial driver's licenses and received several enticing job offers. To celebrate, we treated George to dinner at the Outback that night. The more time I spent with Alice, the more I found myself wanting to be with her. I hadn't realized how enjoyable companionship could be, and I regretted not making a move like this sooner. During dinner that evening, I casually inquired about the progress of the scoliosis study, partly to provoke Wendy. However, her reaction caught me off guard. Instead of erupting in anger, she quietly excused herself from the table and left the room. An hour later, she mentioned she had to visit a sick friend. As she headed out the door, I decided it was time for me to visit a friend as well. It wasn't the smoothest transition, but a week later, Alice and I found ourselves behind the wheel for one of the largest freight haulers out of Carlisle, PA. I departed quietly, slipping away like a thief in the night, without ever confronting my wife. The divorce papers arrived the following day. Moving my belongings into Alice's home, George readily agreed to watch over the place and handle mail forwarding in exchange for rent-free living. Spending our days together, Alice and I surprisingly found harmony without getting on each other's nerves. While disagreements may arise in the future, for now, things are going smoothly. Although we're not planning on having children, if we do, I hope they won't suffer from scoliosis. Carl vanished without a trace. Jane, due to circumstances, had to move in with her mother, and from what I've heard, things aren't going well for her. A few months later, Alice and I visited Oscar in Colorado, and our relationship was stronger than ever. It seemed he was relieved to see me finally taking decisive action. He and Alice hit it off effortlessly. To set things right, Oscar pledged to disclose the truth about the DNA tests to Wendy and Jane when he returned home for Christmas. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.